Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
to set the stage for this story, we must go back to the far-off year of 1988. The location is the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. I was 10 years old, and with me was my mom, dad, best friend, and our golden retriever, Amber. We were very much an outdoor family, and had many camping trips before this and since, but to this day, when I think about it, I still remember the terror I felt that weekend so long ago. After a brief talk with my father recently, it kind of came back to the front of my mind. He also was able to fill in a few details that I had forgotten. This holiday was like many others. We packed up the station wagon with everything we would need for a hike into one of our favorite lakes to camp at. To make this trip even more exciting for me was the fact it was my birthday weekend and I got to pick this lake. After we arrived at the trailhead and got our packs on, my dad got his sidearm out and strapped it on his belt. In Oregon, open carry was permitted in national forests, and my dad always had a gun on his hip while in the woods, which always added a sense of security. We had a close call with a bear one time in which it came in handy. The lake was about a 4-mile moderate hike in some thick forest, but the trail itself was well maintained. It was never very busy, so it was going to be a very pleasant hike in. We started off on our hike, and back in the 80s it was not uncommon to have your dog off leash on the trails in the forest, so we let Amber run and do her thing. She was a good dog and never ran off for too long or jumped on people. She did love people though, and speaking of people, we had not seen anyone else on the trail after about 2 miles in on the hike, which was nice since it was just all of us talking, laughing, and enjoying nature. My best friend and I started to hike ahead of everyone else because we were so energized and excited about finding the first and best tent spot once we got to the lake. Amber was bounding ahead of us and having a great time too. We were about 20 yards ahead of my parents when Amber stopped dead in her tracks. I thought she maybe saw a chipmunk or something, maybe a bird, but her hackles came up as she let out the lowest of growls. She never growls, so we stopped walking, and I thought maybe a bear or deer or something was just off the trail, and she saw or heard it. We immediately started walking backwards, and my parents caught up to us. My dad asked us what was going on. I told him that Amber is up the trail and is growling at something. He tells us girls to stay back with my mom, and he walks ahead to where Amber was at on the trail. My dad gets up to her and looks around. I hear Amber whimper a bit while looking off the trail. My dad comforts her and calls her back and walks back to us. He says it must have been an animal, and he did not see anything right off the trail or ahead of us. He says to let him take the lead and we continue to hike. It did not take long before it was forgotten, and Amber and the rest of us are all having a good time again. We arrived at the lake, and much to my delight, there was no one else there camping. The water was clean and blue, and the shade from the trees made the whole scene just perfect. My friend and I found the best spot to set up our tent, and my parents followed suit. After we had camp set up, my folks went off to fish just down the hill, and my friend and I took off with Amber to walk around to the other side of the lake to catch salamanders. We only made it about an eighth of a mile when Amber stopped and started to growl. We stopped and looked around and heard brush rustling. Then right in front of us a man walked out of the trees. Amber stayed right by our sides and started to bare her teeth. He was taller than my dad, so at least 6'4", was very skinny but had very broad shoulders. He was clean cut and was wearing black jeans and a white polo shirt with loafers. I mean, he did not look like he had hiked at all or was even dressed for the outdoors. He almost looked like he came out of church. We just stood there trying to process the situation when Amber began to bark. The guy just stood there, not moving, and he smiled. Like the creepiest smile. It felt like someone who thought that was what a smile was supposed to look like. Amber kept barking, and this got my parents' attention, and they looked up to us and called out to us to come back. We complied and started to walk back towards them. My dad met us halfway and told us to go back to the campsite, and he was going to talk to this guy. We got back to our camp, and my mom sat with us. I could hear my dad asking the guy if he needed help or was he a fellow camper who had just set up a camp away from the lake. My dad was being polite and calm, but I could see he was on guard and trying to feel out the situation. Now is the time to mention that my dad was retired Army and could be very intimidating when needed. The conversation continues. The guy told my dad he was just on a walk and did not mean to intrude on us. The guy says goodbye and walks back into the woods. My dad walked back to camp, sat down, and told us that he thinks the guy may just be a new camper and does not know much about the outdoors. But my dad said that he got a weird vibe off him and would be keeping an eye out for him. Amber stayed by our side. It was calm, yet she kept looking towards the direction the guy went. A bit more time goes by, and we have a nice campfire going, and the sun was starting to set. We cooked some dinner and made s'mores afterwards. My friend and I decided to go to our tent and read some books and tell each other some scary stories. stories. Amber followed us to the tent and laid right outside of the door. My parents walked down to the lake to sit, have a beer, and just chill. They were never more than 50 yards away. Not long after my parents walked away, I hear Amber start to growl, then we hear footsteps coming from the woods behind our tent. My friend and I turn off our flashlight and go quiet to listen. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the woods. We then hear heavy breathing and a grunting sound. Amber starts to bark, and we then hear the footsteps retreat to the woods. Amber whimpers a bit, and I then hear my parents walking back to the camp. I go out and tell them what happened. My dad said that he heard Amber barking, and that is why they came back up. I ask my dad what we should do, what is going on, and if that strange guy was the one creeping around. He tells me that we will see about moving camp in the morning since we still have 3 days left on the trip, and nothing has happened to warrant just leaving, but he said that we will play it by ear and just be a little more vigilant, and if something changes, we will decide what to do next. He tells us to try to get some sleep, and we all turn in for the night. The next morning, we get up and have breakfast. After breakfast, we head down to the lake to fish. It was a beautiful day, and we were having so much fun the events from the prior day were almost forgotten. We decided around lunchtime that we would go for a short hike to the waterfall that is up from the lake. We were gone for only about an hour, and when we came back, we found our tents opened and our sleepy bags drug out on the ground. My dad tells us to hang back with mom, and he goes to investigate. He comes back and says nothing is missing, but it was not an animal that did this. He says we should break camp, hike back to the car, and find another spot to camp for the next couple of days. I could tell my dad was not wanting to frighten us, but I heard the urgency in his voice. I was very disappointed, but if it meant we could enjoy the rest of the trip and not worry about some creep messing with us, then it was worth it. We broke camp and started our hike back. Dad was in the lead, and we were double timing it and made it back to car in record time. As we walk over to the car, we see that one of our tires was flat. Not a big deal, we always had a spare, but when my dad bent down to start taking the lugs off, we swore. It was not just flat, someone slashed the tire. Dad changed that tire in record time, and we threw everything into the car, and he goes to turn the car on, but it would not start. Dad swears, gets out of the car and pops the hood. He says crap. It turns out someone took our spark plug wires. Old cars like that Chevy wagon did not have internal hood releases. You could just pop the hood from the outside. Dad slams the hood, says some very colorful words, and kicks some rocks. We were stuck, and no one else was at the trailhead. We were stranded. My parents are calm under pressure, and after a few minutes of discussion, it was decided that my dad would start walking down the road until he could hitch a ride to town and go to the auto parts store. Mom and the rest of us were going to wait with the car and look for someone to hopefully pull into the trailhead and help us. A few hours go by, and no one has come to the trailhead. It is getting hot, and we are hungry and tired. My mom makes us some lunch, and we go to sit under a tree to cool off. Amber is by our side and was calm, but then we hear a voice. Amber leads up and starts to whimper. The creepy guy from yesterday comes down the trail and is asking my mom if we need help. My mom tells him we are fine, that it is being settled, and my dad will be back soon. This creep then tells her that his camp is close, and he is parked on the old fire road that is near the lake, and asks us if we would like to come back to his camp and wait until my dad returns. Mom sternly tells him no, that we will just wait here and thank you anyway. He does not like this. He tells my mom that it's not safe out here for a pretty lady and 2 young girls. My mom, like my dad, is no pushover and asserts herself again that we do not need any help and to please just leave us alone. The guy just stands there, smiles wide, and then just turns around and leaves. My mom is visibly shaken, and us girls were just a bit scared. My mom comes over to us and tells us that we need to stay close, do not wander, and that we will be okay. My friend and I are really kind of freaked out and are just hoping my dad will make it back soon. After about another 30 minutes, the creepy guy comes back. This time though, he is not alone and has a slightly younger guy with him. The other guy is dressed as a yuppie camper and had a very stern look on his face. My mother stands her ground as they approach. Amber starts to low growl and her hackles go up. The 2 guys flank us, and one of them flashes a gun tucked into his belt. The older guy tells us that we need to go with them and that they were not asking. My mom backs up next to us and without taking her eyes off them reaches to her belt and pulls out her Bowie knife. My mom said we will not be going and that they need to leave now. The 2 men did not even flinch at this and said that we will come with them or they will hurt us. At this moment though, Amber goes from just growling to barking and puts herself between us and them. This makes the guys stop. My mom yells that they need to leave now. They start backing up, and at that moment we hear a truck pulling into the trailhead parking lot. At the sight of the truck, the guys start to walk away fast and disappear into the tree line. The truck was a forest ranger and he had my dad with him. My dad jumped out of the truck and ran over to us, asking if we were okay. The ranger came over and asked who those men were and if we were okay. My mom explained everything while my dad hugged us girls and told us we will be okay. The ranger takes off to go looking for the men. My dad tells us that he was about 5 miles from the town when the ranger picked him up and took him the rest of the way to get the part for the car. He then drove him back to a car. After hearing what happened, point, my dad was pissed and wanted to find the guys who tried to kidnap us and that had been terrorizing us for the past 24 hours. The ranger came back and told us that he had almost caught up to them, but they sped away in their truck with a camper in tow. They had been parked behind a small ridge behind the lake on an old loggy road. He did not get a plate, but he radioed a description of the men and their truck and camper to the local sheriff's office. He also took our information and said he would pass it on to them. He waited with us until Dad had the car fixed and we were able to leave. We decided to not continue camping and instead drive a couple of hours to spend the last 2 days of the trip at the beach and stay in a hotel. A few days later, a deputy called my dad and told him they never did find the men. He said that it was most likely a crime of opportunity after seeing a woman with 2 girls in tow. He was sure they had been watching us from off the trail and had messed with our camp to judge how my dad would react. When my dad seemed to be too big of a threat, they sabotaged our car hoping to put us in a position where we were vulnerable. He said they would follow up with us if they find out anything else, but according to my dad, nothing ever came of it. Years later, I tried to do some research on crimes in that area of Oregon during the 80s that might have involved something like we experienced. All I could find was a few reports of campers being robbed and a few cars broken into. There was one case of a young lady and her dog going missing from an area near there, but it was never determined what had happened to her, or even if it was something bad or she just ran away. I can tell you that we did go back to that lake a few years later and had a very uneventful camping trip. It was nice to go back and find some joy in a spot that was special to me. I really hope those creepy guys never hurt anyone and maybe were caught for other crimes. I will never know though. I just hope to never run into a situation like that again. I can say that having a dog along with us helped our situation. She was the hero and kept us alert. Amber went on to live until she was 12 years old and passed with her favorite people around her. Remember to stay safe, stay watchful, and it never hurts to have a sweet brave dog with you. You know, Alex began, her eyes glancing around the dimly lit room. I've always had this weird feeling about this place. The room was filled with dusty furniture, the smell of age lingering heavily in the air. It was a stark contrast to the modern, minimalist house we had just left behind. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards creaked with every step we took. The house had belonged to my great-grandparents, who had passed away years ago, leaving it untouched. It was a relic of the past, a silent sentinel of forgotten memories. As we ventured deeper into the house, the air grew colder and the shadows grew longer. Our laughter echoed through the empty corridors, bouncing off the walls like a desperate plea for company. The stale smell grew stronger, hinting at secrets long buried beneath the layers of dust. We had come to clean out the place, to prepare it for sale, but it felt more like we were disturbing something ancient and best left alone. It's just creepy, you know, Alex said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's like the house doesn't want us here. We had split up to cover more ground, and I found myself in a small, cluttered room that had probably been an office once. The windows were boarded up, leaving only a sliver of light to seep through the cracks. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents shrouded in a thick layer of dust. A heavy desk dominated the center, its drawers slightly ajar as if beckoning me to explore. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, sending a jolt of fear through my body. The sound was so loud, so final, that it seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. I whirled around, my hand on the knob, but it was stuck. Panic began to set in as I jiggled it frantically, trying to force it open. Alex, I called out, but my voice was muffled by the thick, oppressive silence that had enveloped the room. There was no response, only the distant echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. My heart raced as I stepped away from the door, my eyes scanning the room for any other way out. The shadows danced on the walls as the light from the hallway grew dimmer, and I could swear I heard the faintest rustle of pages from the bookshelves. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and an eerie feeling of being washed over me. The air grew colder, and the rustling grew louder, as if the books were whispering secrets to each other. The room felt alive, and yet utterly devoid of any comfort or warmth. I tried the door again, but it remained steadfast in its decision to keep me contained. The house groaned, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was the cold or the sudden realization that we had stumbled into something much more than just a dusty old house. As the silence stretched on, I began to doubt that this was a simple case of a stuck door. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the shadows grew more menacing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Okay, I murmured to myself, okay, think. But my thoughts were interrupted by a faint, ghostly sound, a sound that seemed to come from the very fabric of the room. It was the sound of someone, or something, moving towards me. Slowly, deliberately, it grew closer until it was right beside me, so close that I could feel the warmth of its breath against my cheek. I spun around, expecting to see Alex playing a prank, but instead, I found myself face to face with a figure shrouded in darkness. The only thing visible was a pair of piercing eyes, staring at me with an intensity that seemed to bore into my soul. My heart was hammering in my chest as the figure stepped closer, the rustling of its clothing sounding like the hiss of a snake. I tried to scream, but the sound was caught in my throat, choking me with fear. The figure reached out a hand, and as it touched me, the room grew darker, colder. The air was thick with a malevolence that seemed to seep into my very bones. And then, just as subtly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The room was once again bathed in the flickering light from the hallway, the shadows retreating to their corners. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my chest, gasping for air as if I had been underwater. The touch had been icy, leaving an unmistakable imprint of fear that lingered on my skin. I stared at the spot where the figure had been, my mind racing. What was that? A hallucination brought on by the oppressive atmosphere, or something more sinister? The door to the room was still closed, the knob unyielding. I had to get out, to find Alex and tell her what happened. My eyes fell on the desk, and I noticed a drawer that was slightly open, one that hadn't been before. With trembling hands, I pulled it out further. Inside, I found a dusty old journal. The leather was brittle and cracked, but the pages within were surprisingly intact. The handwriting was faded, but as I read the first few lines, the words sent a shiver down my spine. It spoke of a presence, a spirit that lingered within the house, trapped by some ancient curse. A spirit that grew stronger with each living soul that ventured into its domain. The entries grew more frantic as the days went on, detailing strange occurrences and eerie sounds that had plagued the writer's nights. It was my great-grandfather's journal. With a sense of dread, I turned to the last page. The final entry was a plea, a warning to never come to the house alone. The date was the day of his death, almost 50 years ago to the day. My blood ran cold. Was this what had happened to him? The rustling grew louder again, closer this time, and the figure was back, its eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to light up the room. I slammed the drawer shut, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I had to get out now. I threw my weight against the door, and with a final, desperate heave, it swung open. The hallway was empty, the rest of the house eerily quiet. Alex, I called out, my voice shaking. We have to get out of here. My footsteps pounded on the old floorboards as I sprinted through the corridors, the journal clutched tightly to my chest. The house felt alive with malicious intent, as if it were trying to keep us trapped within its cold embrace. As I reached the stairs, something caught my eye, a flicker of movement from the corner of my vision. I turned and saw the figure floating at the top of the staircase, blocking our escape. The eyes bored to me, and I could feel the temperature drop even further. Alex, I shouted again, my voice now a mix of fear and urgency. You can't go out that way. When it was too late, Alex's footsteps grew closer, and before she could see what I saw, she stepped into the hallway, her eyes going wide with terror as she took in the specter looming above us. The figure raised its arms, and a cold wind swept through the house, knocking us both off our feet. The air grew thick, and the shadows grew darker, closing in around us. We had disturbed something ancient and vengeful, and now it had its sights set on us. We were trapped, and there was nowhere to run. Our fate was sealed within the walls of the house that had borne silent witness to decades of pain and despair. We huddled together, our eyes locked on the figure as it began to descend the stairs. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of anguished voices that seemed to fill the very air around us. The house was coming alive with the spirits it had held captive for so long. We had to find a way out, or become part of the house's eternal nightmare. I've always been a night owl. Something about the world being quiet and still at night makes me feel at ease. My apartment complex backs up to a small wooded area with a jogging path that loops around the neighborhood. Even though I knew better, I liked taking late night walks there to clear my head. It was around 11:30 p.m. on a Friday when I decided to head out. I had my earbuds in, listening to my usual true crime podcast. The path was dimly lit by a few sparse streetlights, but I'd walked it so many times I could practically do it blindfolded. About 5 minutes in, I noticed something strange. There was a faint rustling noise coming from the trees to my left. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or maybe just the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned off my podcast and scanned the area, but the woods were pitch black. I shrugged it off and kept walking. That's when I noticed him. About 20 feet ahead, standing just barely within the glow of a streetlight, was a man. He wasn't jogging or even walking. He was just standing there, completely still, facing me. I froze. He didn't move. I thought maybe he was looking at his phone or tying his shoe, but something about his posture felt rugged. I took a step forward, and he stepped back, retreating into the shadows. A chill ran down my spine. I decided to turn around and head home. As I walked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. That's when I saw him again, this time much closer. He was following me. My heart was pounding. I started walking faster, and so did he. I could hear his footsteps echoing mine, deliberate and heavy. I was too far from my apartment to run for it, so I did the next best thing. I called 911. 911, what's your emergency? emergency?" The operator asked. "I think someone's following me," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Where are you?" I gave her my location and tried to keep calm. The operator stayed on the line with me, asking questions to keep me talking. But then I made a mistake. I glanced back again. He wasn't there. For a split second, I felt relief until I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. He had cut through the trees and was now ahead of me, standing in the middle of the path, blocking my way. The operator must have heard my gasp because she asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "Keep walking, stay on the line, and don't engage," she said. I moved to the far edge of the path, giving him as much space as possible. As I passed him, I could see his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were wide and unblinking, his mouth twisted into a grin that sent shivers down my spine. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching me. I broke into a run, not caring if it made me look scared. I didn't stop until I was back at my apartment complex. For weeks, I avoided the jogging path entirely. Every creak of my apartment floor or distant sound from the woods behind my building made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there. Then, one night, I made the mistake of thinking I'd put it all behind me. It was around 8 p.m., early enough that I figured it was safe. The path would still have people on it, right? I convinced myself I'd been overreacting about that night. Maybe the guy was just a weirdo messing with me. I grabbed my earbuds, but this time, I decided against the true crime podcast. I didn't need to make myself jumpy. Instead, I chose something upbeat and left my apartment. The path was quieter than I'd hoped, but the cool air and faint smell of pine were calming. I stuck to the main loop, avoiding the darker offshoot trails. Everything was fine until I rounded the corner near a cluster of picnic tables. That's when I saw it, a Polaroid picture pinned to one of the benches with a small rock. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up. It was a photo of me, from behind, taken the night I was followed. My stomach turned as I noticed a handwritten note scribbled on the back. "You looked scared." I liked that. I dropped the photo and stumbled back, scanning the area. I felt exposed, like eyes were on me again. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling. "911, what's your emergency?" "He's back," I stammered. "He left a photo of me." The operator asked for my location, and I gave it to her while retreating to the nearest street light. I felt safer in the glow of the light, but couldn't shake the overwhelming paranoia. The police arrived within minutes, and I handed over the photo. The officer examined it and frowned. "Where exactly did you find this?" I pointed to the picnic table, but the officer's face hardened as he looked past me. "There's another one," he said. I turned to see a second Polaroid pinned to a tree a few feet away. I didn't want to look at it, but the officer retrieved it. This one was of me standing at the streetlight moments earlier, phone in hand. It had just been taken. I felt my knees go weak. "He's there, right now." The officers immediately called for backup and started searching the area. They instructed me to stay put by the squad car, but all I could do was scan the tree line, waiting for him to appear. After about an hour, the officers returned. They hadn't found anyone but assured me they'd continue patrolling the area. One of them walked me back to my apartment, where I locked every door and window. That night, I barely slept. Every sound felt like a threat. I thought about moving, but money was tight and breaking my lease wasn't an option. Then, a week later, I found a small envelope taped to my door. Inside was another Polaroid. This one was of me, asleep in my bed. I didn't call the police this time. I didn't pack a bag or even lock the door behind me. I just left. I drove to a friend's house 2 towns over and crashed on their couch. I didn't tell them the full story, just enough for them to let me stay. The next morning, I called my landlord, broke my lease, and moved out. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but to the man with the Polaroid camera, I hope you never find me again. Let's not meet, ever. It all started a few weeks ago when I decided to take a late night stroll to clear my head. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever happens. It's peaceful, almost too peaceful. The street lights were sparse but bright enough to give a sense of safety, and the air had that cool autumn crispness that made walking so enjoyable. I set out around 10 p.m., earbuds in, playlist queued. My usual route takes me around the block and down a short trail that cuts through a small patch of woods. I'd done it dozens of times without a second thought, but that night, something felt off. As I turned the corner onto the wooded trail, I caught the faint sound of footsteps behind me. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. I mean, it's a public path, someone else could easily be out for a walk. But these footsteps weren't casual. They matched my pace, perfectly synchronized with each of my steps. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they did too. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to look casual, but all I could see was darkness. My stomach twisted, and a chill ran down my spine. I told myself I was being ridiculous and kept walking, but my gut was screaming at me to turn around and go home. I decided to test it. I stopped abruptly and pretended to adjust my shoe. The footsteps behind me stopped too. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure whoever it was could hear it. I stood up and started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps resumed, quicker now, as if they were closing the distance. That's when I broke into a run. I'm not a runner, but adrenaline is a hell of a motivator. I tore down the path, my lungs burning and my ears straining for any sound behind me. I didn't dare look back. I burst out of the woods and onto the main road, where the streetlights seemed impossibly bright. Only then did I risk a glance back. The trail was empty. Whoever had been following me was gone, or maybe they'd never left the woods. I didn't stick around to find out. When I got home, I locked every door and window and double-checked them all twice. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I convinced myself it had all been in my head. Maybe it was just an overactive imagination or some harmless coincidence. But a few days later, I found something that changed everything. I was taking out the trash when I noticed something wedged under my doormat. It was a Polaroid photo, old and slightly crumpled. The picture was of me, taken from behind, walking on that same wooded trail. Scrawled on the bottom edge in smudged black ink were the words, "You're fast, but I'll catch you." I haven't gone for a walk since. I've installed cameras around my house and started carrying pepper spray. I'd like to think it's over, that whoever left that photo has moved on, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear footsteps outside my window. 2 nights ago, I woke up to a soft tapping sound. At first, I thought it was a branch brushing against the house, but as I became more awake, I realized it was deliberate. A slow, rhythmic tap coming from my bedroom window. My curtains were drawn, and for a moment, I debated just staying in bed and pretending I didn't hear it. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. I crept to the window and peeked through a small gap in the curtain. My breath caught in my throat. There, illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlight, was a figure standing just a few feet from my window. They were wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled up, obscuring their face. But what really terrified me was their hand, raised and tapping on the glass with a single finger. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and grabbed my phone to call the police. When I looked back at the window, they were gone. The police arrived quickly, but of course, there was no sign of anyone. They assured me they'd patrol the area and advised me to stay vigilant. Yesterday morning, I found another Polaroid tucked under my windshield wiper. This one was taken from outside my house, looking directly into my living room window. The words this time read, "You looked scared." I like that. I've since packed a bag and am staying with a friend across town. My house feels like it's no longer mine, like it's been invaded by something. Someone, I don't know what they want or why they fixated on me, but one thing is clear, they're not going to stop. Last night at my friend's house, I woke up to a notification on my phone. The motion-activated camera I'd installed outside my house had picked something up. Hesitating, I opened the app and saw a live feed of my front porch. The same figure stood there, hood up, holding another Polaroid. This time, they weren't trying to hide their face. The hood was pushed back just enough to reveal a wide, unsettling grin. They held the photo up to the camera for a few seconds, then carefully placed it under the welcome mat and walked away. I couldn't make out all the details of the photo, but I saw enough to know it was taken through the window of my friend's house, of me sleeping on the couch. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I'm considering going to stay with family in another state, but deep down, I'm terrified that no matter where I go, they'll find me. If they could track me to my friend's house, what's stopping them from following me anywhere? This morning, as I was preparing to leave, I noticed something odd on the motion camera feed. The figure had returned, but this time they weren't alone. A second person, similarly dressed, stood with them. They didn't knock or leave another photo. Instead, they both stared directly into the camera for a solid 5 minutes. Then they turned and walked away without a sound. I've decided I can't stay here any longer. As I write this, I'm sitting in a motel room several towns over, but even here, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every creak of the building or shuffle of feet in the hallway sends my heart racing. I've started receiving texts from an unknown number. Each message contains a single word, forming a sentence over time. The latest one said, "You run, but we'll follow." Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the motel phone rang at 2 a.m. last night. The sound shattered the silence, and my hand shook as I picked it up. I didn't say anything, but a voice on the other end whispered, "You can't hide forever." This morning, I checked out of the motel and drove aimlessly, looking for anywhere that felt safe. I ended up at a rest stop miles away from any major town. I parked in the far corner, my car surrounded by tall trees. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. But as I sat there, trying to calm my racing mind, a car pulled into the lot and parked several spaces away. It was old and beat up, with tinted windows that hid the driver. My stomach churned as I watched the door slowly open. A man stepped out, wearing a hoodie just like the others. He didn't look in my direction, not at first. moment. But then, as if sensing my gaze, he turned his head slowly and locked eyes with me. A smile spread across his face, cold, knowing, and completely devoid of any humanity. I threw my car into gear and sped out of the lot, tires screeching. In my rearview mirror, I saw him casually get back into his car as if he knew exactly where I was going. My gas tank is nearly empty now, and I don't know how much farther I can go. If anyone reads this, please be careful. Sometimes, no matter how fast you run, you can't escape what's chasing you. To those strangers, and to whoever might be helping them, let's never meet. Ever. I've run out of gas, stranded on the side of an empty highway. It's eerily silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I've tried calling for help, but my phone battery is dead. I keep glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that beat-up car pull up behind me. I don't know what to do. I feel trapped, paralyzed by the fear that any move I make might bring them closer. But staying here isn't an option either. The sun is setting, and I know I need to find somewhere safe before night falls. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The road stretches endlessly in both directions, flanked by dense trees. I decided to head toward a faint light I could see in the distance, hoping it's a house or a gas station. As I walk, the silence presses down on me, every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes making my heart race. I keep turning around, convinced I'm being followed, but there's nothing there. At least, not that I can see. The light ahead grows brighter, and I realize it's coming from a small cabin. Relief washes over me as I quicken my pace, but the feeling doesn't last long. Something about the cabin feels wrong. The windows are dark, and there's no sign of movement inside, but the front door is slightly ajar, swaying gently in the breeze. I hesitate on the porch, debating whether to go in or keep walking. Before I can decide, a voice calls out from behind me. It's soft, almost playful, and sends a chill down my spine. "You've come so far," it says, "but I didn't think it would be this easy, did you?" I spin around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there's no one there, just the empty road and the dense woods beyond. The door to the cabin creaks open wider, and I feel a pull, like I'm being drawn inside against my will. I don't want to go in. Every instinct screams at me to turn and run, but my legs feel rooted to the spot. The last thing I see before stepping inside is a Polaroid taped to the doorframe. It's a picture of me, taken just moments ago, standing on this very porch. To whoever is out there, if you find this, don't look for me. Just run. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. It was just supposed to be a quick run to the convenience store down the street. I had forgotten to grab milk earlier in the day, and I figured a 5-minute trip couldn't hurt. It was around 9 p.m, dark but not unusually late, and I didn't feel any particular sense of unease as I walked out the door. The store was practically empty, save for the cashier and a man browsing the candy aisle. I grabbed the milk, paid quickly, and headed back out into the cool night air. The walk home was quiet. The streets in my neighborhood always seemed deserted after sundown. About halfway home, I started to notice a faint sound behind me. At first, I thought it might be my own footsteps echoing in the silence, but then I realized it didn't match my rhythm. Someone was following me. I turned my head slightly to glance over my shoulder. A man, maybe the same one from the store, was about 50 feet behind me. He wasn't running or trying to catch up, just walking at a steady pace, hands in his pockets, head slightly tilted down. My stomach twisted, but I told myself it was a coincidence. He was probably just going the same way. I sped up slightly, hoping to create some distance, but when I glanced back again, he had quickened his pace too. My palms started to sweat as I picked up the pace even more. I wasn't far from my house now, just 3 blocks, but the sense of safety I usually felt in my neighborhood was nowhere to be found. I turned the corner onto my street and, without looking back, broke into a jog. My house came into view, and I reached into my pocket to grab my keys, fumbling as I ran up the driveway. My fingers finally found the right one, and I unlocked the door, slamming it shut behind me and throwing the deadbolt into place. I stood there for a moment, my back pressed against the door, breathing hard. I didn't hear footsteps anymore, but I wasn't convinced he was gone. I peeked out through the peephole, but the porch was empty. Maybe he had just kept walking, I thought, trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock on the door. I froze. I hadn't seen him approach. How could he be there now? Another knock, this one louder. My hand shook as I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator, explaining that someone was outside my house, but before they could respond, I heard a voice through the door. "Why did you run?" It was low, almost calm, but something about it chilled me to the bone. I just wanted to talk. The operator's voice on the other end snapped me out of my panic, and I told them someone was trying to get into my house. They assured me officers were on the way, but those minutes felt like hours. The man knocked again, harder this time, and the doorknob rattled. My entire body was trembling. Then, suddenly, the knocking stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear anything, but the night had gone eerily quiet. I stayed there, frozen, until I saw the red and blue lights of the patrol car flash through the windows. The police police searched the area but didn't find anyone. They took my statement and promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood. For weeks after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside my window sent me into a panic. I've since moved to a new place and installed every security feature I could think of. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a faint knock on the door and it all comes flooding back. A few nights ago, I woke up to my phone buzzing on the nightstand. Groggy, I reached for it, thinking it was a spam call or notification. But when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a video message from an unknown number. The video was only a few seconds long, but it showed my old house. The camera was shaky, as though held by someone walking up the driveway. The video ended abruptly, just as the person filming reached the front door. I called the police immediately, but there wasn't much they could do. My old house had new tenants now, and there was no proof the video was recent. They advised me to stay vigilant and contact them if anything else happened. Last night, it escalated. I woke up to find a single piece of paper slid under my apartment door. Written in bold, blocky letters was a message: "I found you." I spent the rest of the night barricaded in my room, clutching the phone in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. This morning, I contacted a security company to upgrade my system even further. Cameras, alarms, motion sensors, everything. I also reached out to a private investigator to see if they could track the person down. But no matter what steps I take, I can't shake the feeling that it's only a matter of time. To the man who refuses to leave me alone, let's not mate. Ever. Tonight, it happened again. This time, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My bedroom window. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and grabbed the knife from my nightstand. The sound of footsteps filled the apartment, deliberate and slow. Whoever it was wanted me to know they were there. I called the police again, whispering my address into the phone, but I knew it would take time for them to arrive. The footsteps got closer, stopping just outside my bedroom door. The knob turned slowly, and I pressed myself against the far wall, knife shaking in my hand. The door creaked open. A tall figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their gaze. "Why do you keep running?" they asked, their voice calm and almost mocking. Before I could respond, the sound of sirens broke through the silence. The figure turned their head toward the window, then back at me. "We'll meet again," they said, slipping out of the apartment as quickly as they had entered. The police found no trace of them, just the shattered glass and muddy footprints leading away from the window. I don't know how they keep finding me or whether they're so fixated on me, but I've made a decision. I'm leaving everything behind: my job, my apartment, even my name. I don't know where I'll go, but I can't stay here. To the person who has made my life a nightmare, let's not meet. Ever. The stalker's background started coming to light after I hired a private investigator. At first, there wasn't much to go on, no clear identity, no photos, and nothing linking them to me. But then the investigator found something chilling. The man had been stalking someone else before me. A woman who lived 2 towns over had a nearly identical experience. Strange knocks on her door, messages left on her car, and even a break-in. The worst part, she vanished 6 months ago, and no one ever found her. The investigator discovered a possible name: Andrew, based all records of restraining orders filed against an unknown individual fitting his description. Andrew wasn't just stalking at random, he had a pattern. He chose people who lived alone, people whom he could isolate and terrorize. The last no restraining order was filed 3 years ago, and the woman who filed it also disappeared under mysterious circumstances. I can't stop wondering why he chose me. What about my life made him focus on me? Did I just happen to catch his eye at that convenience store, or has he been watching me for longer than I realize? The investigator also uncovered a disturbing piece of evidence: a small storage unit registered under a fake name but linked to Andrew. Inside were personal items from his previous victims, photos, letters, and in one case, a set of house keys. I felt sick when I learned this, wondering if my own belongings would have ended up in that unit had I not managed to keep running. The police are involved now, but there's no guarantee they'll catch him. He's careful, calculated, and knows how to disappear. For now, all I can do is keep moving, stay vigilant, and pray that he doesn't find me again. To Andrew, or whatever your real name is, let's never meet, because if we do, I might not survive. It was a sad evening, and I was on my way home from a friend's house. I don't usually walk home late at night, but I didn't live far, and the air was crisp and refreshing. My neighborhood is generally safe, so I didn't think twice about cutting through the park to save time. The park was almost empty, save for the occasional jogger or dog walker. The path was lit by dim streetlights, creating long shadows that stretched out across the trail. I had my headphones on, listening to a podcast, when I felt a strange, almost primal sense that I wasn't alone. I pulled one earbud out and glanced over my shoulder. A man, maybe in his 40s, was walking about 20 feet behind me. He had on a heavy coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Nothing about him screamed danger, but something felt off. I decided to keep walking, picking up my pace slightly, hoping he was just out for an evening stroll. But when I glanced back a minute later, he was still there, closer now, and his pace had matched mine. My heart started to race as I realized this wasn't a coincidence. I veered off the main path, heading toward a small side trail that led back to the street. It was darker there, but I figured it would bring me closer to the main road where I could find help if I needed it. The man followed. At this point, I was walking so fast it was almost a jog, my hand clutching my phone in my pocket. I turned my head quickly to look behind me, and that's when I saw it. He wasn't just walking anymore. He was running. Panic set in, and I took off at a full sprint. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like jelly as I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. I could hear his footsteps pounding on the trail behind me, getting closer and closer. I burst out of the trail and onto the sidewalk, nearly colliding with a couple walking their dog. I gasped out, "Help, he's following me." The couple turned just in time to see the man stop abruptly, his face hidden in the shadows. He didn't say a word. He just stood there for a moment before turning around and disappearing back into the park. The couple walked me home, and I reported the incident to the police, but they couldn't do much with the vague description I gave them. For weeks after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards sent me into a panic. One morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. A Polaroid picture slipped under my door. It was a photo of me taken from outside my bedroom window. On the back, written in messy, jagged handwriting, were the words, "See you soon." I moved out of that apartment the very next day. For a while, I felt safe again. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a secured building with cameras and a front desk that monitored everyone who came in. I even changed my routines. No more late night walks or predictable routes home. But a sense of unease still lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. A few months later, I received a package at work. It was strange because I hadn't ordered anything, and no one at the office mentioned sending me a gift. The package was plain, brown, and unmarked except for my name and the return address, which was blank. Furious but cautious, I opened it. Inside was a single item, a key. There was no note, no explanation, just an ordinary house key taped to a piece of cardboard. My stomach dropped as I stared at it, trying to make sense of what it meant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that someone, somewhere, was unlocking a door. My door. I checked and rechecked the locks, even pushing a chair under the handle for good measure. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The next morning, I took the key to a locksmith, hoping they could tell me something about it. They examined it briefly and said it looked like a generic copy, nothing special. But then, the locksmith said something that chilled me. This kind of key is usually made to fit old locks. You don't have an old lock at your place, do you? I shook my head, feeling sick. If it wasn't for my apartment, then what was it for? 2 nights later, I got my answer. I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against metal. It was faint at first, but then it became clear someone was trying to unlock my door. I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The security system hadn't triggered, which meant whoever it was had a key. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. There he was, the man from the park, the one I thought I'd escaped. He was hunched over, fiddling with the lock, his face partially obscured by the brim of his baseball cap. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. They told me to stay quiet and wait for the police to arrive. I clutched the phone tightly, my eyes never leaving the peephole. The man seemed to sense something because he stopped, looked directly at the door, and then at the peephole as if he knew I was watching. A smile spread across his face. He raised his hand and pressed something against the peephole, a Polaroid photo. I couldn't see what was on it, but the gesture was enough to paralyze me with fear. The sound of sirens finally broke the tension. He turned and walked away calmly, disappearing down the hallway just as the police arrived. They searched the area but found no sign of him. When they retrieved the photo from the door, I felt my knees give out. It was a picture of me, asleep in my bed, taken from inside my apartment. I've moved again since then, but I'm haunted by the idea that he's still out there, watching, waiting. Last week, I received another package. This time, it wasn't left at work. It was on the doorstep of my new apartment. The package contained a small notebook. Its pages were filled with messy, erratic handwriting, detailing moments of my life that only someone watching me would know. Times I left for work, what I wore, conversations I had on the phone. There were even sketches of me, crude but unmistakable. The final page had a single message scrawled across it: "You can't run forever." I've reported everything to the police, but there's still no trace of him. I'm preparing to move again, further this time, to a place where I hope he can't follow. But deep down, I know he'll find me. He always does. Last night, as I was packing my things, I heard a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't the deliberate, eerie knocking he'd done before. It was frantic, loud, and desperate. My stomach turned as I crept toward the door, knife in hand, and peeked through the peephole. It wasn't him. It was a young woman, her face pale and streaked with tears. She kept glancing over her shoulder, clearly terrified. Against my better judgment, I cracked the door open, keeping the chain lock in place. "Please," she whispered, "he's after me me too. My blood ran cold. Before I could respond, a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. Her eyes widened in terror, and she screamed, "He's here." I slammed the door shut and locked it, backing away as fast as I could. Through the peephole, I saw the man step into view, his baseball cap casting a shadow over his face. He looked at the woman, then at my door, and smiled. The woman's screams echoed down the hallway as he grabbed her, dragging her out of sight. I wanted to help, but fear rooted me to the spot. By the time the police arrived, there was no sign of either of them, just a single Polaroid left on the floor outside my door. It was a picture of me, taken through the peephole, with the words "next time" scrawled across the bottom. I knew I couldn't keep running. He'd always find me. But this time, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't going to be his victim anymore. I contacted a private investigator, someone experienced with cases like mine. Together, we devised a plan to trace him. I upgraded every piece of technology I owned. Hidden cameras, motion detectors, even a GPS tracker. Every time I moved, I left behind bait, small clues to see if he'd take the trail. And he did. It took months, but eventually, we found the first solid lead. A storage unit registered under a fake name. Inside, we discovered a trove of horrifying trophies, photos, personal items from his victims, and detailed plans for what he'd intended to do to me. Among the items was a list of names, and mine wasn't the only one with next written beside it. The police have taken over now, but I'm still looking over my shoulder, waiting for the moment he returns. He's been one step ahead of me for so long, and I know this isn't over. To the man who's haunted my every move, let's not meet. But if we do, I won't be the one running. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I've always considered myself a pretty cautious person. I lock my doors religiously, triple check my car when I leave it, and never let strangers too close. But none of that prepared me for what happened last fall. It started with something small, a note left on my car. I parked in my usual spot at the apartment complex, and when I got back from work, there was a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. It read, "You're beautiful when you're focused. Can't wait to see you again." I thought it was weird, but brushed it off as a one-off creepy gesture. Maybe it was a prank or someone mistaking my car for someone else's. I threw the note away and didn't give it much thought. A week later, I found another note. This one wasn't playful, it was chilling. "I saw you in the red sweater today. You look even better up close." My stomach dropped. I'd worn a red sweater to work that day. Someone was watching me. I reported it to the apartment management, but they said there wasn't much they could do without proof. They offered to review the parking lot cameras, but they didn't find anything unusual. I felt trapped, exposed in my own home, and things escalated quickly after that. I started noticing small signs that someone had been near my apartment. A smudge on my window, a faint scratch on the lock. One night, I came home to find my patio chair moved directly under my bedroom window. That was the night I called the police. They took my report seriously and increased patrols in the area, but there wasn't much else they could do. The officers told me to keep my doors locked, be vigilant, and call if anything suspicious happened again. The real terror came about 2 weeks later. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of creaking wood. At first, I thought it was the usual noises of the old building, but then I heard it again, closer. Someone was inside. My heart raced as I reached for my phone. I tried to stay quiet, hoping whoever it was wouldn't come near my bedroom. I could hear slow, deliberate footsteps moving through my living room. My bedroom door didn't have a lock, and I realized I was utterly vulnerable. I called 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was in my apartment. They assured me officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. The footsteps stopped, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't try to open the door. Then I heard a voice, low and calm, on the other side of the door. "Why are you hiding?" "I just want to talk." I thought I was going to pass out from sheer terror. My hand shook as I held the phone, whispering to the dispatcher that the person was right outside my room. I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, and then, mercifully, the footsteps retreated. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was gone. They found the front door lock had been picked and footprints leading away from my patio. The officer told me the person likely fled when they heard the sirens. I moved out the very next day, packed what I could fit in my car and left town, staying with friends until I could find a new place. It's been months now, and I've done everything I can to protect myself. New locks, cameras, alarms, you name it. But the fear followed me. 2 nights ago, I was settling into bed when I heard a noise outside my window. My new apartment is on the 2nd floor, and I'd always felt safer knowing no one could reach it easily. But when I pulled back the curtain, my blood ran cold. A ladder was propped against the wall, leading straight to my window. At the top, a man stood staring at me through the glass. It was him. I screamed and scrambled for my phone, dialing 911 as fast as my fingers could move. The man didn't flinch. He stayed there, watching, as if daring me to do something. Then, as the operator answered, he climbed back down the ladder and disappeared into the night. The police arrived quickly and searched the area, but once again, he was gone. They found the ladder abandoned in the bushes below and told me they'd increase patrols, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't think they'd catch him. Last night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up with every light in the apartment turned on, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every sound. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint tapping at the front door. My breath caught in my throat as I crept toward it, knife in hand. Through the peephole, I saw nothing, just the empty hallway. But when I opened the door, I found another note taped at eye level. This one didn't have words, just a single Polaroid picture of me taken through my bedroom window. In the photo, I was asleep. I don't know what to do anymore. He's found me twice now, and I know it's only a matter of time before he tries something worse. The next morning, I decided to take drastic action. I contacted a security expert and explained everything. They outfitted my apartment with additional locks, reinforced windows, and a state-of-the-art surveillance system. It gave me a temporary sense of control, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't stop him. He was always one step ahead. 2 days later, the system picked up movement outside my apartment. At 2 a.m., I checked the live feed on my phone and froze. He was there, standing in the middle of the parking lot, staring directly at my camera. He didn't try to hide or run. He just stood there, holding up a sign that read, "You can't hide forever." I called the police again, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. This time, they arrived in record time, and when they reached the parking lot, he was gone, but they found the sign left propped against my car. The officer in charge looked at me with genuine concern and said, "This isn't random. He's fixated on you." I knew then that movie wasn't enough. I needed to disappear entirely. I packed what I could, quit my job, and left the city that same night. I've changed my name, deleted my social media, and moved to a rural area where no one knows me. Months have passed, and for the first time in what feels like forever, I've started to relax. My new town is small, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and I've avoided forming any close connections to keep my past a secret. Life has settled into a quiet routine, and I've started to believe I might finally be safe. But last night, that fragile sense of security shattered. I was walking back to my cabin from the general store, the woods around me alive with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. The path is long and dimly lit, but I've taken it dozens of times without issue. As I neared the edge of the forest, I noticed something odd, a faint glow coming from my cabin's window. I distinctly remember turning off all the lights before leaving. My stomach dropped. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to listen. The woods were too quiet now, no crickets, no wind, just an oppressive silence. Summoning my courage, I crept closer, my phone gripped tightly in my hand, ready to call for help. When I reached the window, I peered inside. The glow was coming from a single candle placed on the dining table. Next to it was an envelope with my name scrawled across the front in messy, familiar handwriting. He had found me. I didn't go inside. I ran back to the store, my heart pounding, and called the police. By the time they arrived, the candle had burned out, and the envelope was gone. There was no sign of him, no sign he'd ever been there, but I know what I saw. The officers assured me they'd patrol the area, but their words felt hollow. He's out there, watching, waiting, and this time, I don't think he plans to leave empty-handed. This morning, I found another Polaroid. It was tucked under my cabin door, just like the others, but this time, it wasn't of me sleeping. It was a picture of me standing in the woods last night, staring back at the cabin. Written below it, in the same messy handwriting, was a single word, "Run." The mystery deepened later that afternoon. While packing my things to leave the cabin for good, I found something else slipped under the doormat, a small USB drive. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my laptop. On it were dozens of files, photos of me, journal entries written as if from my perspective, and a document titled Phase 2. The file contained detailed plans for my every move, from fleeing the cabin to potential hideouts I'd consider next. It even included conversations I'd had with locals, suggesting someone had been eavesdropping. One file stood out, a video. When I clicked on it, my blood turned to ice. It was footage of me, filmed from just inside the tree line near the cabin. The video ended abruptly, but before it cut out, I saw something chilling. A figure was crouched in the background, wearing my red sweater from that first note. To the man who has turned my life into a waking nightmare, let's not meet, ever. It happened when I was 22, during my last year of college. I was living off campus in a small, run-down apartment complex just a few blocks from the university. Rent was cheap, and the neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, in hindsight. One evening, I decided to stay in and binge watch a new TV series. My roommate was out for the weekend, visiting her family, so I had the apartment to myself. Around 10 p.m., I realized I'd run out of snacks, so I threw on a hoodie and walked to the corner store a block away. The air was crisp, and the streets were deserted, save for a few parked cars and the distant hum of traffic. As I was walking back, I got the distinct feeling I was being watched. You know, that prickly sensation on the back of your neck. I glanced over my shoulder but didn't see anyone. Shrugging it off as paranoia, I quickened my pace and made it back to my apartment. That's when I saw it. The blinds to my living room window, which I always kept closed, were slightly parted, just enough for someone to peek through. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was probably the wind or a loose string. Still, I locked the door behind me and checked all the windows. Everything seemed normal. An hour later, I was curled up on the couch when I heard a faint knock on the door. Not a hard knock, just a soft, deliberate tap tap tap. My stomach twisted. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Who is it? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I grabbed my phone and crept to the peephole. The hallway light flickered, casting eerie shadows, but no one was there. I stood there for a moment, frozen, before deciding to double check the locks. Everything was secure. Then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a knock, it was the sound of someone jiggling the doorknob. My blood ran cold. I called 911 and whispered to the operator that someone was trying to get into my apartment. They told me to stay on the line and remain quiet. As I backed away from the door, I heard a voice, a low, almost sing-song tone. Why are you hiding? I just want to talk. I couldn't breathe. The operator assured me police were on their way, but it felt like an eternity. The jiggling stopped, and the voice grew more insistent. Come on, don't be rude. Finally, red and blue lights lit up the window, and I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. The police banged on the door, shouting, "This is the police. Open up." I unlocked the door and flung it open, shaking, but the hallway was empty. The officers searched the building but didn't find anyone. They took my statement and promised to patrol the area. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and shadow felt like a threat. The next morning, I noticed something chilling. Scratched into the wood of my front door, barely visible, were the words, "I'll be back." I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later, breaking my lease and staying with friends until I could find a new place. But it didn't stop there. 2 months after moving into my new place, I found a note taped to my car windshield. It was eerily familiar, written in the same handwriting, "Nice to see you again." My stomach sank as I realized whoever it was had found me again. This time, I called the police immediately. They took the note as evidence and told me they'd increase patrols in the area. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I installed cameras around my apartment. I set up motion alerts on my phone and spent the evening glued to the screen, waiting for any sign of movement. Just after midnight, the motion alert went off. My heart pounded as I opened the live feed. There, on the camera facing my front door, was a shadowy figure standing perfectly still. They didn't knock or try the doorknob this time. They just stood there, staring directly into the camera. After a few minutes, they walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The police came again but found nothing. They suggested I stay with someone for a while, but I was too scared to even leave the apartment. For the next week, I barely slept, jumping at every sound and compulsively checking the cameras. Then, one morning, I woke up to find another note slipped under my door. This one was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a single Polaroid photo of me, taken through my bedroom window while I was sleeping. The discovery shook me, but the nightmare didn't end there. 2 nights later, the motion camera sent another alert. This time, it wasn't the front door. The alert came from my bedroom window. When I opened the feed, I saw a hand pressed against the glass, pale and still, as if waiting for a reaction. A moment later, the hand disappeared into the darkness. I stayed frozen, too terrified to move. I didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, I packed my bags and left. I couldn't stay there anymore. I moved to a new city, somewhere far away, and started fresh. I told myself I'd done everything right this time. I used a fake name on the lease, didn't share my address with anyone I didn't trust, and avoided any patterns that could make me predictable. For a while, it worked. I felt safe again. But then, last week, I found a package on my doorstep. There was no return address. Inside was a single item, a Polaroid camera. Attached to it was a note, written in the same familiar handwriting. It read, "Let's make some new memories." A part of me wanted to destroy the camera, to toss it in the trash and pretend it never existed. But curiosity got the better of me. I loaded the film it came with and took a picture of the empty room, just to see if it worked. The photo developed quickly, and when I looked at it, my blood ran cold. The room wasn't empty. Standing in the corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Their face was obscured, but I knew it was them. Somehow, they had already found their way inside. I left the camera and the photo behind as I fled the apartment that night. I drove for hours, stopping only when exhaustion forced me to pull into a motel. I'm still here, too afraid to go back, too afraid to stay in one place for long. To the person who refuses to let me go, let's not meet. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.